So first of all, start with these jobs numbers. They were so surprising to so many people. 266,000 instead of 1 million. Some people thought it would be 2 million. Do they tell us anything beyond this one data point?
I think it's hard to interpret. My sense is that it's got a lot to do with the emerging labor shortages that we're hearing about almost everywhere, that managers in many different places are talking about and worrying about it. And if people can't find workers, employment's got to go up. Evidence for that is that we really had an extremely strong average hourly earnings print this month. Now, it's only 1 month, and they were down last month, but they were up at a 9% annual rate this month. And probably the figure was artificially held down by the fact that most of the new jobs were in low-wage sectors like restaurants. So I think what we're seeing is more and more evidence of labor shortage, and maybe that'll prove to be transitory. Maybe it'll turn out that as people go back to school, more and more people come into the workforce and we'll lose that sense of labor shortage. But as I look at the data, I see much stronger evidence that people who retired over the last year aren't coming back. I see more and more evidence that people who in one way or another have changed around their lives aren't coming back for a while. So I expect that as the economy grows rapidly, as everybody thinks it's going to over the next few months, that labor shortage problem is going to grow, that's going to be putting more and more pressure on wages, and that's ultimately going to move into prices. So I actually think there's reason to think that inflation might even accelerate from where it is this summer, rather than the deceleration that the Fed and the Treasury are so confidently predicting. You know, it's further evidence for that view to look at the housing market. You see the prices of housing rising at incredible double-digit rates in the teens. That probably is telling you that rents are going to be going up before long. That's why people are buying these houses in part. That's certainly why private equity is buying up a large amount of houses. And right so far, rental factor has been holding down the inflation indices, and that's about to change. So between the inventory issues, the labor shortage issues, the rental issues, I have to say that my concerns about inflation are increasing.
Are we contributing to it in part by keeping people on the sidelines because of how much we're reimbursing them for being unemployed? That's something that both President Biden addressed this week and Secretary of the Treasury Yellen did. They were both asked pointedly, you're paying people a lot of not to work. Is that making the situation worse? Both of them thought that's not the problem. They think it's more a matter of having to stay home to take care of kids or elderly relatives. What do you make of that?
Respectfully, I think it is close to self-evident that the fact that people are being paid more to stay at home than they would be to work in millions of cases is reducing the available supply of labor. I think the fact that the fraction of the unemployed who are getting unemployment insurance is at record highs is contributing to people being more picky about jobs. You can argue that it's really important relief. You can argue that it's really important insurance that we're providing. But I don't see how one can plausibly say that paying people more to not work than to work is having no effect on the availability of workers. And I think we just need to recognize that. It probably was the right thing to do when we really wanted people to be very careful to stay home and not spread COVID. And so when these very generous kinds of unemployment insurance provisions were put in a year ago, I thought it made good sense precisely because we wanted to stop the transmission of the disease. But I think it's very hard to justify and rationalize them right now. And I would rather see the strong impulse that the administration has, and they're absolutely right about this, to support working families channeled into things like the child tax credit rather than payments that reward the decision not to work and reward it more generously than the decision to work.
Larry, as a macroeconomist, are you concerned at all that our models might not really let us know where we are? If we're driving the car too fast, is the speedometer working? Because we haven't seen this sort of phenomenon perhaps ever in the history of our economy. And let's be frank, the jobs numbers came in very different from what economists thought they were going to be. At the same time, we never saw the economy go down that fast, come back that fast, and goodness knows with all the monetary and fiscal stimulus, do we really have a model that tells us where we are and where we're going?
What we're seeing in markets is that because the Fed is so clear about its reluctance to raise rates, you're seeing very little movement in nominal rates. But under the surface, you're seeing a reduction in real interest rates and an increase in the inflation premium that's priced into the difference between nominal bonds and real bonds. And we haven't seen a 3 or 4 month movement in inflation break-evens that was as large since these markets got since these index bonds got invented many years ago.
Right. The Fed may be very clear about that, but the former Fed chair, who is now the Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen, wasn't quite as clear this week. One of the big issues for investors was when she came out and said in response to a question, she said, well, look, we may get to a point where the market's heating up enough so that we actually have to increase rates. She came back out afterwards and said, well, I really wasn't trying to predict. At the same time, what'd you make of what she had to say?
I felt for Janet. I've been there. People make comments, they get interpreted in a certain way, and the markets get very excited and see strategy where there's only innocent economic commentary. I don't think that is a big deal. On the other hand, what she said was self-evidently true, that if the economy gets going sufficiently strong and there starts to be inflationary pressures, as part of containing those pressures, interest rates will be raised. I don't see how a reasonable person could disagree with that statement. And the fact that that was so alarming in markets to the point where she felt it necessary to provide further clarification of that, I think points up what is really quite dangerous in our macroeconomic strategy between monetary and fiscal policy. We're creating a sense for markets that it's always going to be let the good times roll. And I think when people get the idea that the punch bowl's never going to be removed until there are actually people staggering around drunk at the party, it makes it more likely that the party's going to get out of control. And the older way, which was to kind of recognize that the people with the punch bowl were going to be monitoring the party comprehensively and trying to look ahead, had a lot to say for it.